All right, everyone, the red light is on and we are recording. This is Mark back for another episode of the Veteran Semi-Professional. So today's an interview episode where I'm interviewing a veteran about their life and career after the military, all in an effort to help you if you're trying to figure out what am I going to do once I put my hands back in my pockets, grow up my hair, and start wearing these things called quote unquote civilian clothes. If you're on here, this is the show for you. So I talk to people about what their path has been like after the military. We talk through key decision points, tools, tactics, frameworks that they've used, all an effort to help you and your family. If you're thinking about what am I going to do after the uniform, we want to put together a plan, give you the tools to succeed so that you will land on your feet and have a good, fulfilling post-military life. So super excited for today's guest. We're going to talk about all kinds of great stuff from veteran benefits to Skillbridge program to working remote, writing, freelancing, all kinds of awesome stuff. So Randy, if you can take a minute and introduce yourself, man, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me on the podcast. So I joined the Army a long time ago, not as long as some of your interviewees, but I joined in '87 when nothing was really going on. Like the last thing that really happened was Grenada, right? And but before that, and I think this is important to my story, is my dad worked for EDS, Ross Perot's company, and we traveled all over the world. You know, I lived in Iran right before the revolution in the '70s. I lived in England, then in Holland for 5 years. And then I ended up graduating from high school in England and going to college for a year. And I didn't want to go to college. My dad was like a big white collar, blue collar. Hey, if you don't go to college, you're not going to be able to live like, we've
Right.
lived, and you're not going to be able to travel and stuff like that. So I wanted to join the Army, but I never talked to a recruiter because I went to a private school and all these other locations, Iran and everything. Never saw a recruiter in my life. Only I saw Stripes, and Full Metal Jacket came out right before I joined, and so I went for a year and I didn't like it. And my dad was really surprised, but he said, "Hey, try it for a year." So I tried it for a year. I didn't like it. Went to the recruiter, joined. He showed me all these recruiting videos. Back in the day, said, "Hey, you could be a communication line, role, or and then the video was like you could lay cable along the ground, above the ground, and they're in a tree or something, or beneath the ground and they're digging like a trench for it." I'm like, yeah, I'm not interested in that. Well, you can get like a $1,000 bonus. Back then bonuses were nothing. And I was like, yeah, not so much. And I was like, I heard, what about Rangers? And he's like, yeah, I'll show you the Ranger video. I was like, yeah, that's it. And so I got a Ranger contract with no bonus, nothing back then, because no one cared if we joined the Army or not. Everyone was making their recruiting. No one cared. So I think the biggest part of me joining was I saw Stripes. I saw, Full Metal Jacket. You run, you do push-ups, you do sit-ups. So that's what I did. I was in delayed entry program for 2 months. I did all that. I just happened to be in cross country and track in high school, but I wasn't very good, but I was above average just because I did it. I knew how to stretch. And I think the biggest thing, if anyone's listening to this who hasn't joined the Army or knows someone's going to join the Army, is, if you can run, you can do really well in the Army because running helps you ruck, the whole cardiovascular, the ability to be PT'd to death anywhere and then take a shower and be able to work a whole day is like phenomenal. It's like it puts you so far ahead of everyone else. And it's always, I mean, I've never been a spectacular runner, just about above average. And it's always served me that, I beat 75% of the people and I can recover before them and then I can perform. So I think that's, if anyone's going to join the Army, go to special ops or something, I think that's the most important thing is just being able to run above average.
You know,
So yeah, what?
no, please go. Yeah.
No. That was
Okay,
the end of that
gotcha.
topic. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I was going to say, so I think that the Army in particular is a very, I'm obviously a little biased experience wise, just because that's where I also came from, very running kind of endurance sports culture. Okay. And I think sometimes people can look at that and like snub it off like, oh, well, I want to be strong and all this stuff like that. 100% matters too. Like, I want to throw that aside. Right. But I think a lot of times when you think about going on a long mission, moving stuff, heavyweight over terrain, having to, potentially, get in a firefight, recover, move somewhere, do something like that is endurance. And it's not just the physical endurance, but it's like the mental endurance that comes And it's something you can build via an endurance sport. And I think that's kind of like how those two connections happen in some sense. Okay, so you mentioned, I have to ask, what was life like in Iran prior to the revolution? That's crazy, man.
Oh, obviously it was, I remember my dad, I was in third grade when we moved there, and my dad was like, "Hey, it's gonna be different. We're gonna learn new things. We're gonna, blah, blah, blah." And I'm whatever, 9, 10. And then my question was like, "Will there be ketchup?" And he's like, "Well, if there's not, we'll bring our own."
The
I
most
was like, "All
important
right,
thing to a 9-year-old. Yeah.
I'm solved. My problems are solved." But there was a private school there. It was called Tehran American School. It was American curriculum, and they also sent a lot of Iranian kind of elites there to get American education, so they could go to college in the U.S. and everything
Right.
like that. I went there for 3 years. Actually, I have my own podcast called Passionately Wrong, and we were talking about this with my counter host,
Yeah.
and my dad listened to it, and he gave me notes. And because I always say, "Hey, we spent 3 years there. We were there from 76, 77, 78." He's like, "We only spent 2 years and 2 months there." I was like, I'm not going to go redo that YouTube video. Sorry, Dad. But so it was like 2 years and 2 months. We got there at the end, in the middle of third grade, and I left in the middle of fifth grade. And it was nice. I didn't have a problem with it. I think my mom had more of a problem. She wore jeans, and she would get her butt pinched by Iranians when she went to the bazaar, because
Yeah.
if you didn't wear chador, you weren't dressed properly and things like that. But she was bigger than all of them, and she would elbow in the head. They'd get run over by a car, and everything was good. But it was fun. We had all the other Americans there that worked for my dad's company. Had a Jeep, and we had a Jeep club. All the Jeeps would go out in the middle of the desert, and we'd have big barbecues, and we'd shoot rockets into the air and the desert. And we went all over, to different cities all over Iran. And the school was fine as far as I remember. I mean, third to fifth grade, so it wasn't significant. And they closed the school down. The last year the revolution was starting, so we went. It was kind of like COVID, I guess. We did a month, and then they sent us home because there's tanks in the street. And then they let us come for a week, but they had like copies, like 100 copies. Like, here's your next 3 months of work in case you don't come back.
Oh
And
my
so we
gosh.
go home, and we had all this homework, but no one ever did it. And I think we probably went to school after the first time we left. We went back once, and then maybe we went back once more, and then we didn't go back. And there's blackouts and tanks in the street and machine gun fire at night. And I wasn't really scared. My dad was really good about it. And he was like, "Don't worry about it. Let's play some Monopoly, whatever." And then eventually Ross Perot organized an evacuation of everybody, go to the airport, get everyone out. I don't know the exact deal, but there was a 747 that only the people from our company got in, that Ross Perot rented or bought or something. And also two of the higher level guys, managers there, got arrested, which was the impetus for everyone to get evacuated out, because
Yeah.
the number 3 and 4 guy were like, "Hey," they just got arrested.
Yeah.
And Ross was like, "Activate
Yeah.
phase plan B alpha," or
Right.
whatever.
Right.
And because according to my dad, they had been, hey, most of the people who worked for Ross Perot at the time were ex-Vietnam vets.
Right.
My dad was in the reserves, and they said, "Okay, three ways to get to the airport from your house. Make sure they don't use the same major roads, whatever, as much as possible. Practice them. Everyone have a go bag. One suitcase ready to go for each member of the family. All this stuff." So when we left really expensive Persian carpets that my parents had bought, like a hand carved rocking chair that they'd bought in Pakistan. So a lot of I don't have any pictures from before I was in fifth grade, except for whatever my grandparents still had for me. But as far as family pictures, not so much, any of the traveling or anything we did before then, and they don't exist anymore. My comic collection is still in Tehran somewhere. That's probably worth $1 million if I ever go back. So, well, anyway, it was interesting. It was interesting. I don't remember a lot of it. I don't remember being afraid at all. But there was, the last couple of days there was riots, and they were banging
Yeah.
on the buses. We were going home and throwing tear gas at the buses, trying to break the windows and stuff. I don't remember being afraid. I remember going, "What's going on? This is crazy." And
Yeah.
that's it.
That's
So,
wild. That's wild. That's wild. Especially like being there, like the days that it happened. That's crazy. Um, so you mentioned, when you joined the army, you went in with a ranger contract. Is that where you spent your career?
I just spent my first enlistment there, so I got to the Rangers, and I don't know, for anyone who doesn't know, the Rangers are usually, most of them are young, most of them come right out of high school. So I was actually a year older than a lot of the new guys, and I also had a year of college, which most of them didn't. And so I did three. I did 3 years. I went to Ranger school. I went to sniper school. I got my EIB. So I came out of there stacked. Plus, I was in Panama, jumped into Rio Hato in Panama during Operation Just Cause. So I had a CIB and a Purple Heart, and I had all these ribbons that no one had ever seen before. And so when I got out of there as a E5, I was stacked. For as far as the real army was concerned, unless
Yeah.
someone had been to Grenada, I was
Yeah.
stacked. And I was so stacked that I remember going to the E6 board when I was in the Q course and in San Antonio, because I went to medic course. And the first sergeant, they're like, how'd you get your Purple Heart? Okay, you're good. Next.
Yeah.
That's pretty much all. It was really weird. I didn't expect that. Of course, I was prepared, but they're just like, I really don't have anything to ask you. Let's bring somebody else in. And then I went to the Q course. I actually failed the Delta course, and I ended up becoming a Bravo for a couple of years, and then went back to the Delta course later on. And so Rangers, I mean, I don't know. I'm not a current Ranger. I'm not a 9/11 Ranger. I'm a 88 to 91 Ranger, and every day was a Ranger day, pretty much. I mean, it was.
Yeah.
I assume it hasn't changed a lot, but there are. I know the Army's changed a lot, so maybe it has. But every day you proved that you wanted to be there in some way, especially as a
Yeah.
private.
Yeah.
And it was before we got ninja clothes and ninja equipment and ninja, did ninja missions. We were airfield seizure basically
Yeah.
was the big one, and patrolling and staying out in the snow overnight with just a poncho was fun. And that was a daily event. That was every day was a Ranger day. That's all I can say about being a Rangers. However, I say that, and yet some of my best friends in the Army, even though I spent over 20 years in special forces, are Rangers that I still communicate with, that I connected after Facebook came online and said, "Hey, where are you at?" And so yeah, so it was different. Anyone who was in your platoon, you were like this with. So yeah, so I went to Q course, the long Q course, because I went through almost the whole medic course and then had to go to the Bravo course.
Yeah.
Um, that was before SEER school was required. I went to SEER school later. Went to seventh group, uh, and I was in 3rd Battalion. And I don't know if you know much how the battalions work, but the battalions rotate. If you similar, you were in civil affairs, probably even deployed more than I did some years. But basically, the battalions are deployment cycle. Yellow, amber, green, red. They don't do that anymore. But back then, especially in Bragg, where you were cleaning trash off the side of the road as a Green Beret and stuff like that. But because I was in 3rd Battalion, one of our companies was the SIF.
Hmm.
So we only had 2 companies to do all of the deployments
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
the cycle, which means I was gone every year. Every year I was in South America from the first year I arrived till the year I left. And some years I went twice if it was an off year,
Yeah.
or some years I there wasn't one year when I didn't go to South America, though sometimes I went to Afghanistan and South America in the same year. So I mean, when I applied for jobs in the future, they're like, "Okay, what are all your deployments?" And I'd have like 22 deployments to South America. Like, what the did you ever space? Did you send it to the United States? It's like, man, I was gone every single year. I went somewhere,
Yeah.
and that's just because I was in 3rd Battalion. Like, there's other battalions that there's only so many missions, and if
Right.
there wasn't enough mission for every ODA, then they would do something in the States. They would go to Red Flag or something like that.
Yeah.
So I also never went to SWIC. Uh, I think I fell through a loophole because I reclassified as a medic after doing 3 years as a Bravo as a
Hmm.
weapons guy. And then I went back to SWIC for a year and a half, followed on by the new ANOC intelligence course, which was like 3 months long. So I had this like window of 18, 24 months back in SWIC. And I think on paper, it just looked like I was, if they didn't look too closely, that I wasn't an instructor or something. It looked like I went to SWIC. So no one ever asked me to go to SWIC ever. So I just 3 years in group, went to the Q course for another 2 years and got ANOC out of the way, and then came back into seventh group pretty much in the same team. And I stayed on the same team until I became an E8. So I stayed on the same team from E6 to E8, except for that 2 year window. It's like 10 years on the same team.
That's wild.
And which is really unheard of. And the only difference was the team kept changing numbers, because initially I was an 8-4, and then they all decided like, hey, we're going to make all the teams in every group the same. So every 6 team is a Halo team and every 5 teams a scuba team. But they didn't have that initially when I got there. Someone got a really great notation on their OER and said, hey, let's make this all the same. And then all of a sudden we're all the same. So then they changed us to a 6 team. And then when we were having trouble manning everybody, they said, hey, we're only going to have 5 teams per company. So they got rid of the 6 teams. So because we had more people than the 4 team, they decided to combine the 4 and the 5. So we became 5. So I was on 8-4, 8-6, and 8-5, different team numbers, but basically the same team for 10 years.
Yeah.
So
what a career, man. All over the place. It's crazy. So one of the things I always want to ask is, what was, you spent a lot of time in uniform. What was your transition out of the Army like? Kind of good, bad, ugly, and sideways?
Well, I was assigned to Army Africa in Vicenza when I was transitioning, and I turned 50. I was my 31st year in the military as a sergeant, and I was a sergeant major, and I was in the middle of a divorce, and I was like, I don't know I had a bachelor's degree that I cobbled together through night school and weekends. It took me 10 years to get. I got it in 2020, and then I pursued an MBA for a little bit until I got frustrated and said, what am I studying this stupid stuff for? What am I going to use this for? I don't even know. And then I did what I wanted to do, which is a master's of fine arts in creative writing. So that, by the way, if anyone wants to pursue it, is like twice as long as an MBA, because there's no doctorate in creative writing. So when you get a master's in creative writing, you can teach in colleges and stuff without being, having a doctorate, and you teach creative writing and things like that. So I got that right a year before I got out. And then I was like, well, I know I want to be a writer, but I don't think I can make money initially. I'm not Jack Carr, who hadn't published his book yet, but I'm not. I didn't have the contacts or maybe the talent. We don't know that yet. But I didn't think I would make money go out the gate with my books, though I still wanted to write. So I went on a walkabout. I walked the Camino de Santiago, which is a northern hiking route across northern Spain.
I'm actually, I'm going to jump in just for a second, because I'm actually, my wife and I are going on our honeymoon here in about a month, and we're going to the northern terminus. We're not doing the trail. I would love to do it at some point, but we're going to be in Santiago de Compostela, which is the northern end of it. Yeah, so that's super cool.
That's the end. Yes, the end of the whole thing. Yeah. Like they have like 12 different routes, and they all in there. So it's 500 miles if you go the French way, which is the traditional way, which is what most people consider the Camino de Santiago. It's 500 miles from just across the border of France, walking through the Pyrenees Mountains, and then across the plains, all the way to like you said, Santiago de Compostela. And it's a month. It's like 15 to 20 miles a day. If you're smart, you're only bringing 15-pound backpack. If you're a ranger, you're like 15-pound backpack. What the hell is that? And so I
carry more weight. Yeah.
I packed like a 30 something. I was like, I should be fine. Of course, I got messed up knees and back and stuff, but I'm like, God, how bad can it be? So the first day is like straight up and straight down, and it's like one of the hardest days. It really is. And And I was like, on the second day while I was carrying my light backpack, I was like, what the hell am I doing? And I met this girl who was carrying like a purse on her back. And I was like, is that all you brought? She's like, no, I sent it by taxi. I mean, what are you trying to prove anyway? I was like, oh, what am I trying to prove?
Yeah, yeah,
What am I
yeah.
doing? It's like, yeah, I'm gonna send it by taxi for the first week just to get used to my shoes and walking, and then I'm gonna start carrying my backpack. I was like, what a great idea! Which
Yeah.
I thought of yesterday. Now I don't know if you've seen the movie. It's called The Way. It's directed by Emilio Estevez
I have
and
not.
stars.
I not. I don't think it's about his. I'm blanking on his. Michael Douglas, is that it? Who? Or
No,
no,
no, no. It's
Martin
his
Sheen.
father, Martin Sheen.
Yeah,
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 Martin
yeah.
Sheen's
Who
in it,
walked it? Yeah.
and Emilio Estevez plays his son for 5 seconds, and he dies on the first day of the Camino. He gets hit by lightning. And I was watching the show before I hiked it, and I was like, come on, this is the dumbest premise for a movie ever. So the first day, it rained. I was walking up to this mountain, and I got almost to the top of the mountain, and there's people around me, and it's just a bald mountain. There's no trees or nothing. And then the storm from hell with like fist size hail in
Oh,
May
jeez.
coming out of the sky, lightning, and everyone around me is running. The common language is English on the road. Everyone, I mean, there's people from all over the world. There's people from
Yeah.
Africa. There's people from all countries in Asia. Every European country you can think of, and everyone's like running around like we're all gonna die. It's just like the movie. And I'm just like, and it's all muddy right by the time I get there. I'm just like trying to keep my not fall, and everyone's running by me and bumping me and stuff. And I was like, whatever, guys. And then I catch up to them because they're all huddled in this little hut the size of like a bathroom. There's like 50 people in there, and I just passed them. But yeah, so that was the start, and it didn't. And then everything after that, people would talk about the storm because along the Camino, it happened to everybody, especially within a week of when I went. They're like, oh, there's this really bad storm where it like hailed ping pong balls. Like, I don't want to hear it. I was on top of the mountain. This size hails like this lightning coming. And so, but so I did the Camino, and I went to the Camino. I was like, I'm just gonna chill and think about. I had a month off, and I was just going, what am I gonna do? And first of all, I met the girl who told me about the backpack thing. Became my wife. We got married a couple months ago,
Oh, that's a great
and
story. Congrats.
yeah, thanks. She's Hungarian, and she was living in Romania. So I moved to Romania like a year later after I got out of the army. And this wasn't terminal leave, by the way. This was just I had leave saved up that I
Yeah.
couldn't save anymore. So I took a month off, and they let fortunately my chain of command let me take it off. And then and by the way, anyone who wants to walk the Camino, after we give my contact information, if you want to write me, I'll tell you great stories about it and convince you to go. But I mean, I was, had a desk job. I had my knees. I couldn't run anymore because of my knees. I weighed 222 when I started, and I was like, man, but I was working out in the gym every day, but I just couldn't do the cardio because I couldn't run anymore. And I walked it, and my knees hurt every day. But I walked the 500 miles. I lost 32 pounds,
Dang.
and it was a fantastic experience. I met people from all over the world, and some of the people I still communicate with, and of course, I met my wife, and also about day 5, I got an email to a newsletter I subscribed called Story Grid, and it was a methodology for self-editing your book or planning a book. You know, if you're a writer, and it was Sean Coyne was the author. He had 30 years in the publishing industry, and he wrote this book. Like, hey, this is my experience with authors, and I'd used that. He has a great podcast, and I used it to write my thesis, and which was a 400-page book about the first Green Beret, female Green Beret, before females could wear Green Berets, and it said, hey, we're having a course. It costs $6,000. It's in Nashville, and it's about my methodology. Sign up here. And I was like, well, that's a sign. So I signed up for it. And what I didn't realize was it was a certification course to be a developmental editor using his methodology. And once I finished and passed all his certification requirements, he would also feed me clients to edit their books, which I never considered as an option for me. And so I went there, and then I figured out, like, on day 2, I was like, oh, I'm going to be certified as an editor, because I just wanted to learn how to write better.
Yeah.
And so I got, it was a 1-week in-person course with a 5-month requirement to do some other deliverables. And then I passed, and then I got my first client, which was a science fiction author. I got the book around here somewhere. She published her book a year later with my help, and then I just edited her second book, and that started my my career as an editor and ghostwriter. But going back to what your question was like, how is my transition? Well, they made me the sergeant major of transition for the base. So in a way, it was, I knew everything.
Yeah.
But even in there, knowing the experts that were sitting on either side of me, and no, basically I was just people. There's a lot of soldiers that get out that are not very happy with the system, and they're just very rude and very bitter. And so my job was to, hey son, come in here. We're trying to help. If you don't want the help, that's fine. But you should probably listen, because sometimes they listen, sometimes they listen to me when they wouldn't listen to anyone else, and sometimes they wouldn't listen to anyone. But that was my whole job, was to, I wasn't the advisor, I wasn't the mentor or the counselor or anything. I was the fix this soldier because he's harassing us in our class,
Yeah.
Or he won't wear the proper uniform, or he's, whatever, late or something. So, but I was right next to all the transition people, so all the questions are right there, and I still didn't understand a lot of stuff, and I was kind of upset, because it should have been easier, and there's a lot of misconceptions, and there's a lot of things that are breezed by that probably need to have more time spent on, I felt. And so when I knew I wanted to be a writer, and now I had this editor thing under my belt before I got out. So I was kind of happy with the way stuff was going, but I didn't know how much money I was going to make editing either. So, but I did do my disability, and I got a pretty good disability rating. So I was happy with that. And then of course I retired. So I had that to fall back on no matter what. And and I had some savings. So I was kind of like, I'll figure it out. I mean, I got a year, I can always get a job. I got a TS clearance. I can get a job within a year. If I can always, there's a contracting jobs everywhere.
Right.
It's just, do I want to fall down that rabbit hole? I didn't, but I got divorced 3 times through mostly my fault. Some is just the Army's fault. Cause I got married, and then 9/11 started, and I was gone 7 years out of 8,
Yeah. Yeah.
One of my wives basically said, I didn't marry you to be alone. And so I'm not sure that's anyone's fault. But so I didn't want to do that anymore, especially since I was got married. I was with this girl that I really loved, and I didn't want to put it in jeopardy again. So I was looking for other options. Because I worked in the transition area, the Soldier for Life area. One of the people that worked there was working for the company that did the VA benefits advisors, and she needed an assistant for Europe. So I became the deputy veteran benefit advisor for Europe. But that didn't come automatically. I got out in June. I didn't get that job till January. So that was 7 months where I was trying to make my editing job work, but I was traveling around Europe too with my girlfriend, and off my retirement basically. But which is another thing. I mean, if anyone wants to live for an extended period of time in Europe, and you have a retirement check or a VA check, for one person, you really only need about 12 or 1,300. Prove that you're getting $1,300 a month, and almost every European country will take you. It's like you have to beat 1.5 of their minimum wage or something like that.
Yeah.
So if you're getting a decent $1,500 or something, you can pretty much get a 1-year visa anywhere. And you can retire anywhere based on that too. You might not be able to work initially, so that's something you got to think about. But you can definitely retire over here just as a pension. But anyway, back to, so I finally got that benefits job right as COVID hit. So I went on a cruise right before COVID hit in February. I went on a cruise the last week of February, and I came back, and it was like the zombie apocalypse. Like everyone's like what's going on? And I'm like, I mean, because I didn't have any internet on the cruise. I come back, and the United States still hadn't panicked yet, but I was supposed to fly through Milan, Italy, to back to Romania. And I started, as soon as I got started getting an internet, they're like, hey, if you want to change your ticket, or you want to full refund or whatever. I was like, why would I change my ticket? What's going on? So I started to read all this stuff about how Italy was like dying.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And I was like, I looked at my girlfriend. I was like, we should probably buy some masks, but I wouldn't even know where to buy masks. So we went to CVS. I was like, could we get some masks? They're like Halloween masks. I was like, I'm thinking like those things in the hospital, like ones like I didn't know the surgical. I didn't know
Yeah.
the word
No,
surgical mask. I was like,
nobody knew
I
what
was
that
like,
was back then.
I don't know, go over your ears, like this. Like,
Yeah.
why would we sell those? I was like, I don't know. I guess it's not that big of a deal. So we get on the plane. Plane's like a 25% full, and we're like sleeping on all this extra chairs. Like, this is great. We get to the airport, empty. It's like tumbleweeds literally in the hallways. I'm like, what is going on? We get out into the real world. Nothing's open. We were standing. It was Fashion Week in Milan, which is the craziest time. And I just thought we were just lucky to get a hotel room in the middle of the city. And there was like 5 people working in the Hilton, and they're like, "Hey, we're not even having a buffet. There's some coffee over there, and we'll throw croissants at you. Open your mouth." So I was like, "What is going on?" And then we went to the airport. The airport was like, the airplane's empty. My girlfriend's convinced that the person that sold her the Starbucks coffee at the Milan airport coughed on her, and that's why she got COVID. But there was a guy right behind her that was coughing on her too in the airplane, so that's probably it too. But I'm convinced I got COVID during the training for my VA, because it was in DC, and they had brought people from all over the world to get
Oh,
training.
geez. Yeah.
And within 2 days, there
Everybody was
40 of
sick.
us. Everyone was sick. 2 of the instructors were so sick they had to replace them, and 5 of the students never came out of the room again for the whole time we were there because they were
Oh,
so sick. And I got semi-sick, and I was just like, I don't know what this is going on. And then of course COVID in March, everyone was like, COVID.
yeah.
So I get back to Romania to start my job, and they want me to move to Germany. And I'm like, I get off the plane in Romania. I don't know if this is about transition, and we'll have to end my stories pretty soon so we can get into other stuff. But it's a really good story. I get off the plane. Everyone's in like Mach 20, like, space suits with the fever guns, which no one had ever seen before. And like,
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
like, what is going on? And like, you're in you're in quarantine for 3 weeks, and if you leave your house, we're going to check on you. We're going to execute you on the spot, or whatever their problem was.
Yeah.
And I was like, what? He's like, and so we go home, and I call my boss, and I'm like, hey, I can't move to Germany. I'm in quarantine. They're like, what? Because COVID still hadn't hit the U.S., right? And I was like, yeah, I'm in quarantine. And they're like, why? Are you sick? I was like, no, but I don't know. I'm in quarantine. I can't leave for 3 weeks. So 3 weeks later, COVID hit the world, especially the United States, and they want me to move to Germany. And I was like, Germany closes borders. They're like, what? I was like, yeah, no one goes in and out. I can't go to Germany until this thing's over. And they're like, oh, okay, stay there. And then they forgot about me. And I just stayed in Romania and worked remote. Well, everyone was working remote there anyway,
Yeah.
the whole thing. And so I was the deputy in charge of Europe, but I didn't have to go anywhere. I just stayed at home and worked and supervised people who weren't going to work. So it was actually a pretty easy job. And then I started my editing at night and on weekends. And I actually, that year, working at night and weekends, I made just as much as I did the VA was paying me, which they weren't paying me very much either. And then the next year, I just started doing editing full time. So my transition was weird, but it was also the reason I wanted to work for the VA is because I wanted to figure out the system.
Yeah.
And so have I figured it all out would be the next question. I don't think I've got 100% grasp on it, but I still have contacts that are working within the industry. So I can reach out if I have questions. And I have talked to like probably 50 people since I retired just to mentor them. Like, yeah, I went to the Social Life and I don't understand this. I'm like, hey, let me give you the down and dirty. This is kind of how it works. So, but you almost need a mentor, because while I think all this stuff is pretty much out there somewhere, a lot of it is on the va.gov webpage. It's not all in the right place to make it easy to find.
it's not on the right place, and it is usually written in the absolute least translatable language. It is like so much government speak and bureaucratic bullshit that you got to weed through to figure out. And I'm like, I need someone to just speak to me in like a plain method of like what the hell I'm reading right now. It is so frustrating sometimes. Yeah. Yeah.
And I also applied for, well, I don't know what it's called now. It's that one if you're disabled, you get kind of another GI Bill on top of the GI Bill you already have. It's called
The
V.
VRE. It used to be called Voc Rehab.
Yeah, exactly. So I applied for that, right? And they're like, "Do you have a job?" I was like, "Well, I have a job, but I got to tell you, my disability. I have a back problem, and I don't want to, I have to sit in front of. I want to be a writer, and I don't want to have to go to an office because of these problems. I also have, you know, I have TBI, I have headaches I get all the time, and it's just not convenient for me to do. So I like to pursue my writing career so that I don't have to." And they're like, "Yeah, call us when you don't have a job." And I was like, "Well, that's not very nice." And I've heard other people that it all depends on the counselor you get. And I don't want to rag on these guys. These guys are probably overworked, and they were just starting their Zoom stuff. I get it, and maybe I didn't answer the questions correctly or whatever. But for me, it didn't work out, and so I was a little bit disheartened by that. And I don't understand how that works, but I have other friends that have, got full rides to get a master's in engineer or a lawyer, law school or whatever. So obviously it works for other people. And I would say, try everything. My advice to any veterans is make sure you try everything and you obey their little time schedules, because
Yeah.
even though there's a lot of people that in the VA that make mistakes, if you can prove that you sent the stuff on time, you have a battle that you can win. But if you start missing deadlines and then want to complain, there's nothing to stand on.
Yeah. Yeah. I think like a great, the way I always kind of look at navigating the VA and talking to people about it is, yeah, like you have to do your part. Like I think if you give you tasks to do or timelines, like you need to do your part and meet them. The other thing is like, don't let the system beat you down, because there's gonna be times when like you're on a phone for hours waiting to talk to someone, or you don't get emails back for weeks or whatever it is, and it's frustrating. It's frustrating as hell. Okay. Don't let it grind you down. Okay. You can't get your way through. And also know that if you don't think someone's doing their job, like you can say something, and like you can ask for a new counselor or whatever it is. Like you have that right, and you don't have to just accept the path that like the VA gives you. You can go around it. This isn't, the military anymore where you're going to upset the chain of command. Like you are now the customer to the VA, and like they're there to serve you.
And you're your best advocate.
100%.
So, and I think what you said too, the last thing, where if the person you're talking to, like the counselor I talked to, is not working for you, then call back and get someone else, or call. There's VA reps all across the United States. There's one at every base, VA benefits rep. Talk to someone else who is hopefully better versed in what you're trying to do and more helpful, because there are people who are like I ran all the European VA benefits advisors, and there's definitely some that knew more than others, especially the new people. They don't know as much, obviously, and there's some that were more motivated than others. Like some of these women are that are working this thing were amazing because they had a vested interest. Like if they pictured you as their husband, and you're like, if my husband came here and wanted information, I would do everything I could to help that person. And so you need to find the person that is going to be able to help you. And maybe your question doesn't have an answer, or maybe your question doesn't have the answer you want. That's a possibility, but feel free to ask as many people as you want and find out. And if you get conflicting answers, don't be afraid to call someone out and go, well, I have called someone out. I went to the Texas VA, and this guy's like, hey, if you get 100% disability, you can get another GI Bill for your kids. I was like, that's not true. He's like, yeah, it is. I was like, that's absolutely not. How many people have you told that? I hope you haven't told a lot of people that, because that's absolutely not true. You get DEA. Like, DEA is another GI Bill. I was like, no, it's not. Stop saying that.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. I want to go back to your thought process and decision behind wanting to be a writer or editor. Like, were you doing any of that like while you were in uniform? Like, when did that like idea spark for you of like, this is the path that I think I want to go down?
So the only book I ever wrote was my thesis. Like I said, it was a 400-page fiction book about the first female Green Beret in Afghanistan. And I made a lot of mistakes, and it's still sitting in my hard drive somewhere. And I should, unfortunately, the war's over, so it's kind of pointless. It's not completely pointless, but I'd have to tweak it a little bit to make it more current. But I always wanted to be a writer. I always read when I went on deployments. Everyone else would bring, well, now it started out with VHS, like a crate of VHSs. Everyone would throw their Gladiator and Patriot VHS, and they bring it down there. But I brought a Konkiko box of books, and I had them like, hey, these are my business books, and these are the ones I want to read about science fiction, and these are the ones I want to read about leadership, and then I'd go down there and I'd read about half of them, and that's what I always wanted to write, and that's why I eventually said, why am I doing this? I mean, first master's, I figured I had to get a lot of education to get a good job when I got out. My dad ingrained in me the white, blue collar, white collar. And I knew that eventually I'd have to do that. But I joined the Army for adventure, to travel. And when I was young, and I didn't have the money to do all that. So I wanted to learn how to jump out of airplanes and climb rocks and scuba dive and stuff like that. And I succeeded. I'm super happy with what I did, and I wouldn't change it for anything. But I knew eventually I'd have to do this. So, I did a degree in the MBA thing, and for half of it, and I was like, nah, I don't want to do this. I did international relations for half of a master's degree. I was like, that's just dumb. And then I did the MFA, and I didn't learn as much as I thought I would, to tell you the truth. And the editing course really taught me more about writing than anything else I'd done. And then I just started reading more books about how to write better and different methodologies and stuff like that. I wish I'd started editing / writing before I gotten out, because I probably could have been making $50,000-$60,000 the year I got out, like I did after I'd worked nights and weekends that first year with the VA benefits thing. And this is what I'd like to pass on to anyone else. I mean, the reason I really wanted to do this is I didn't want to work another 9-to-5 job. I didn't want to work a contract job. I didn't want to leave the home. I wanted to be able to travel where I wanted to go with my family, and I wanted that freedom. And that's real. And I was as soon as I got out, I was like, I'm going to move to Greece or Portugal, because they have the lowest cost of living, and that's where I wanted to go. And Romania's got a pretty low cost of living too, but it's not part of the Schengen. I don't know if you know what the Schengen is.
I don't know.
So the Schengen is I don't know how many countries are it, but it's basically Western Europe, right? And they don't have any borders. There's no passport control when you go across the borders and stuff.
Yeah.
So when you go across, so Hungary's part of the Schengen and Romania is not. So when you hit the Romanian border, you have passport control and you have to get a stamp. You can only stay for so many days, stuff like that. And then once you get into Schengen and Hungary, you can go anywhere west of Hungary pretty much, and no one's checking any borders. There aren't any borders. And the same thing when you get off airplanes. If you fly from Greece to Italy, then you can just get off. There's no passport control, just like you're getting off in the United States to another state, right? But if you fly from Greece to Romania, then you're going to go through passport control. So I actually, one of the reasons I called you up, Mark, was to tell you that I'm doing this skill. I'm not Skillbridge. I applied for Skillbridge. They haven't got back to me yet. But I am doing the career skills program in Bragg. I've been doing it in Bragg and Polk. I've already mentored 2 people, and I have a third one coming online in June, where I just offered an internship. And if you're transitioning out and your commander lets you, just like with the Skillbridge, for I think it's up to 3 or 4 months. I can't remember exactly.
It's 180 days before you exit.
Yeah. So I think the skills program, though, the career skills program might be a little less than Skillbridge. I don't know. They're kind of connected, but they seem different. I don't know.
My understanding always was that the career skills program is actually technically underneath it's the same authorization as the DoD Skillbridge program. It's literally just the Army wanted to call it their own thing, so they call it their career skills program.
Oh, okay.
But I'm 97% sure that it's basically it's the same program. They just branded it under a different thing.
I seem to have to get certified under each base because Skillbridge hasn't approved me yet. So that's my problem. I got one at Bragg and I got 2 people at Polk. So if you're in Polk or Bragg, it's really pretty simple. They've already approved me. If you got a different base, you can contact me on my webpage. should I say my webpage?
Yeah, please.
www.randysurles.com, or www.thestoryninja.com. Either way. You can contact me there, and I'll get you hooked up on how to get an internship with me, on how to be a freelance editor or author, whichever you want, or if you want to cross over, it doesn't matter. And I'll tell you about my career, and you'll be able to work with me for 3 or 4 months, and we can do some chapters and look at your book if you got a book, or if you want to edit, you can help me edit or something. But that's really what I wanted to do when I called you up, is I wanted to make sure more people knew about it, because I'm in the handout for Bragg. I've seen my name on it, and that's how this guy found me. But other than that, if you don't pay attention, you're going to miss it.
So I think that's a super cool program for someone who it's a great way to like get a very practical skill that you can then transport around with you anywhere. Okay. And I think that's the awesome thing about writing and editing, is it provides you a really great lifestyle flexibility, because as long as you have, a laptop and internet connection, you can do it. Okay. I've had a couple of people on this show who kind of live, the digital nomad life, and it's awesome. If that's what you want, it's fantastic. Like, you could travel around Europe and write and edit. I also want to make a couple kind of quick plugs for people out there to think about. And I'm sure there's some people listening to this show. You might be thinking to yourself, like, oh, I'm not a fiction writer. Like, I don't know much about writing or something. I guarantee you there are people listening right now who you probably write a ton for the military. Okay. Now, it's military style writing, right? But I know, like, when I first started writing, for my blog, or having to do stuff, even when I was at business school, I had to write a shit ton as a civil affairs officer. I really did, like, a lot of reports. I had to write every single day. And, if you come from a intel background, or, special ops world where you have to do, like, write a lot of reports, man, like, that hones your skill. And especially, military writing, where you have to be very precise with your language. You can't use fluffy stuff. It becomes super helpful. I remember writing a report one day, and it was I was attached to an SF company in Syria, and the chief for the company, like, sent me a completely red lines report of just all the edits. And he's like, "Hey man, I don't care that you have a degree in English. Here's why you're fucked up." And I was like, it was great, because he was just, like, very precise with language, and, like, very particular, and it was fantastic. So I challenge anyone out there, if you're sitting there looking at yourself saying, I don't know how to write, or, like, I don't know how to be an editor, you might then look at, like, what you're doing in the military, and you might be writing way more than you think that you are. And that is a skill that really transfers. It is not, writing is very much a skill that takes time and effort to develop. And people who are effective writers, that is absolutely a skill that people want, because not everyone knows how to do it and do it well.
I would caveat that with, there's different kinds of editors.
Yeah,
There's
for sure.
copy editors, there's proofreaders, there's line editors. I've tried them all, because when I was not making money, I tried to make money. But I realized that I suck at copy editing, grammar, and spelling, and I'm not kind of bored by it. So I'm what's called a developmental editor. So people give me their whole manuscript, fiction, nonfiction, and I help them organize it better. I help them stay on point. Each chapter's on point if it's nonfiction. If it's fiction, hey, what's the character arc and things like that. And I've had a couple books on the #1 list on Amazon, and had a New York bestseller list. Operation Pineapple Express by Scott Mann just came out last year. It was on the New York bestseller list. So I've done a lot of stuff that proves that I kind of know what I'm talking about. So if you wanted to do an internship with me, you're going to learn something. And a lot of, funny enough, I have, like, probably 8 officers and 1 enlisted guy that are my clients right now. Most of them are former military, 2 of them aren't. And they come to the table with kind of what you just said. Hey, I wrote a lot, I can write. And then I'm like, yes. And you have a lot of good stuff in here, but you have to reorganize it and focus on things to make it more compelling. Nonfiction or fiction. Just, if you want to write a history book that just says, hey, on this day at this time I ate lunch and I had this for lunch, that's one thing. But if you're trying to get a point across or a message, then it's not completely different. But you have to focus your writing and take take it apart and say, is this servicing my reader? Because everything you write, if you're trying to sell it, is servicing your reader.
Right.
And the other thing, I know you do a podcast, and this is on YouTube, right? Eventually.
Yeah. So I do have a YouTube channel. I'll be blunt in saying, like, I'm not great at video editing or anything. So usually it's just like the raw video gets thrown up on
Yeah.
YouTube.
Yeah. So I've done 3 podcasts. I'm about to start another one, which is going to be based on, the veteran freelance kind of life. I think that's going to be the title, actually. But podcasting has its own little nuances of knowledge. There's like 50 different platforms you can be on. Some of them are better, some of them are worse. Whether you edit, whether you're not, whether you're going to go like the jerk and because you're going to edit your thing, or whether you're not, what your focus is. All that stuff is you have a really good focus with transition. I think there's I've only seen 1 or 2 others out there, and they all have a different kind of lean. But I can definitely help people start a podcast. I can help them with their YouTube channel. I can tell them how to monetize their YouTube channels, and things like that. So I think one of my podcasts that I was really proud of is Selling Girls in America. I worked with a company or a nonprofit called Guardian Group to talk about the problem in the United States of the human trafficking and stuff like that. It was pretty interesting podcast. So anyway,
very cool.
That's what I'm offering out there for anyone who wants to internship, and it's also very cathartic. If you don't know how to edit, I can teach you how to edit. And then I've edited probably 60 or 70 manuscripts now, and I've become such a better writer because of it. Because you read it and you notice oh man, that's not working. Why isn't that working? And you kind of dissect it for these guys. And then at the end, when I write my own stuff, I have a partner that I work with now, and she's like, "Oh my God, that's amazing." And I'm like, and she's like, "I can see why you want to be a writer. You should write a book." And I was like, "I'm working on it." but so I've done ghostwriting, I've done development and editing, I do book coaching now too, which is from start to finish. Hey, this is my concept. How do I get there? How do I outline my book and things like that?
That's awesome. I hope someone reaches out and starts learning about the world of editing from the show. This has been fantastic. Well, Randy, we're winding down to the last few minutes here. Okay. And so in a minute, I want to pass back over to you, just providing, last thoughts, parting shots, words of wisdom to the crowd. But before I do, there's a question I always ask my guests. And you told me you've listened to a few episodes, so I think it's coming up here. But thinking back to your time in the Army, you spent a lot of years in uniform. What was the best and or worst chow hall you ever went to?
The worst chow hall was Organi, Afghanistan, 2002. We just had tents. I don't even think we had any hard. We had one hard building, and we weren't getting resupplied. So it was just whatever we could scrape together on the ground from this really small village nearby. But it was real SF living. You're this is what I signed up for, right?
Yeah.
But the best, and I heard this, the first episode I listened to of yours was about 4 episodes ago. And he said the same thing I said, man. The third of the 75th Chow Hall was freaking amazing. And I know when you go overseas, they got the ice cream, cathedrals and the salad bars. And I don't really count those. I mean, they're not really Army Chow Halls. Most of them are contracted and they get supplied from but a real, I just remember being a brunch day on Saturdays and Sundays. And the third of the 75th was steak. And I mean, it was the same. It was this, in a way, it was the same as these contracted ones. And we just had it back in the 80s, and it was awesome.
Wow. That's impressive that it's been that good for that long too. This isn't just, the Army, I think, is military in general in the last, 10, 15 years is really, I think, started to understand that, food is a huge part of performance, and having good nutrition, makes better soldiers and everything. And so, I think most people probably back in the, late 80s, early 90s probably didn't have great chow halls, but I'm glad to hear that Ranger Battalion has maintained that throughout the years. That's awesome. If someone is listening who is in 375 and you can find a way to get Mark Delaney invited to come down and speak, I would love to come and experience this chow hall. If there's a way we can make that happen, y'all, I would love it. Yeah.
They've moved places. I mean, when I was in third and 75th, they were out at Harmony Church where Ranger School is now. We moved when I was in that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, awesome. Randy, I really appreciate your time. I appreciate you reaching out to you. This has been a great conversation. You've got just a tremendous story, man. So much good stuff in here. So much great life experience. It's been a real pleasure talking to you. So I just want to give back over to you for any last thoughts you want to give out to the crowd as they're thinking about, life after the uniform.
I mean, you really, I think about 2 years out, you should kind of like, what do I want to do? How does my life want to be? And where do I want to be in like 10 years, Because I didn't want to be contracting. I didn't want to be away from my family in like 5 years out. And then 10 years out, I definitely didn't want to be, sitting in an office. And that's why I kind of went this direction. I'm really, I don't know if blessed is the right word, or lucky, or universe is looking after me, but COVID was not a good time for the world. But for me, it was like that year where I got to stay at home and work and kind of do my editing and not have to commute to work, and all those extra hours I saved where I was working on my editing thing just seemed to work out really in my favor. But just, even if it's a tentative plan, even if you're not going to make a plan because you're trying to figure stuff out, where do you want to be in 10 years? And then try to make incremental goals to get there. It's probably my best advice. If you're interested in freelance life, reach out to me at randysurles.com. If you're interested in the Camino, I'll get on a Zoom call and I'll talk to you all day about that, because I love that. I haven't convinced anyone to do it yet, but I forgot to mention the last 100 kilometers I did with my 75-year-old father.
Oh, that's awesome.
My 16-year-old son.
That's amazing.
We did the last 100 kilometers together. It was a family event, and it was awesome. It was great.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Well, Randy, been an absolute pleasure talking to you. This has been fantastic. I appreciate your time, and for everyone still listening, I think there's still a lot of great stuff you can learn from this episode. So, for those of you still on, please like, subscribe, leave a review, and I'll see you all next week. Take care.